I'm Eleanor. I'm 92 years old. And I've buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children, outlived more friends than I can count, and sat with more regret than I'd like to admit. So when I say what I'm about to say, I need you to understand it's not coming from a book I read or a podcast I listened to. It's coming from 9 decades of living, 9 decades of getting it wrong, and sometimes eventually getting it right. I want to talk to you about something that took me the better part of my life to understand. That thing you're running toward right now, the relationship that's going to complete you, the career that's going to define you, the body you're trying to get, the version of your life that's going to finally feel like enough. I need you to hear me clearly. It's not going to give you what you think it will. And I say that not to discourage you, but because I wish, more than almost anything, that someone had sat me down at your age and told me the truth before I spent so many years learning it the hard way. My name is Eleanor. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where girls were raised with one primary instruction, spoken or unspoken. Be agreeable, be pleasant, make people comfortable. Don't take up too much space. Don't want too much. Don't ask for too much. Smile and make sure everyone around you is okay before you even think about whether you are. I learned that lesson so well, so completely, that by the time I was a grown woman, I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I had spent so long managing everyone else's feelings that I had completely lost track of my own. I thought that was just what being a woman meant. I thought that was love. It took me until I was well into my 60s to realize it wasn't love at all. It was fear dressed up in an apron. I married young. I was 19 years old, and his name was Thomas, and I was certain, absolutely certain, that this was the beginning of everything I had ever wanted. And in many ways, Thomas was a good man. He worked hard, he was faithful, he didn't drink or gamble or run around. By every measure that anyone around me was using, I had done well. I had landed a good one. And so I poured myself into that marriage the way I had been taught to pour myself into everything, completely, without reservation, without ever stopping to ask what I needed, what I felt, what kind of life I was actually building versus the kind of life I was expected to build. We had children quickly, 4 of them in 6 years. And I loved those children with every single cell in my body. I still do. But here is what nobody tells young mothers, and I want every young mother hearing this to really listen. Losing yourself in your children is not the same thing as loving them. I thought devotion meant disappearing. I thought being a good mother meant I wasn't allowed to have dreams of my own, wasn't allowed to be tired, wasn't allowed to be anything other than endlessly available, endlessly patient, endlessly warm. I erased myself so thoroughly that by the time my youngest left home, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. I had given so much of myself away, piece by piece, year by year, that there was very little of Eleanor left, just a woman who was very good at taking care of other people and had absolutely no idea how to take care of herself. Thomas died when I was 63, heart attack. He was there in the morning and gone by afternoon, and just like that, 44 years of marriage ended on a Tuesday in October, and I grieved him. I truly did. But I also felt something I'm ashamed to admit even now. I felt the very first trembling of something like freedom. Not because I didn't love him, but because for the first time in my adult life, I had to figure out who Eleanor was when she wasn't taking care of someone else. And that was terrifying. At 63 years old, I was meeting myself for the first time. I spent the next few years in a kind of wandering I didn't have the language for at the time. My children worried about me. They called. They visited. They suggested I get a hobby, join a church group, sign up for a cruise. Everyone around me was very focused on making sure I wasn't alone. But alone wasn't my problem. My problem was that I had been alone inside myself for 40 years, and no one had noticed, including me. It was around 66 or 67 that I started to wake up. That's the only word I have for it. I started reading things I'd never read before. I started sitting with my own thoughts instead of running from them. I started asking myself questions I should have been asking my whole life. What do I actually believe? What do I actually feel? What kind of person am I when I'm not performing a role for someone else? The answers that came back surprised me, humbled me. Some of them made me deeply sad because I could see so clearly how long I had been living someone else's version of my life and calling it my own. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. And I want you to write this somewhere. Or better yet, let it just settle into you. You cannot pour from a cup you have never filled. I spent decades being generous with everyone around me, and I called it virtue. I called it selflessness. I called it love. But it wasn't love, not entirely. A lot of it was avoidance. Because if I was busy enough taking care of everyone else, I didn't have to sit with the quiet, terrifying question of whether I was okay, whether my life meant something, whether I was enough. It was easier to be needed than to be known. And I chose easier for a very, very long time. I remarried at 71. His name was Robert, and I want to tell you about this because I think it matters. When I met Robert, I was a different woman than I had been with Thomas. Not because I was older, though that helped, but because I had done the slow, painful work of figuring out who I was. And so when I came to that relationship, I came as Eleanor, not as a performance of Eleanor, not as what a wife is supposed to look like, not as someone managing his feelings and shrinking herself to make more room for him. I came as myself, fully, messily, imperfectly, honestly myself. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever done. And it was also the most beautiful relationship of my life. Robert died 4 years ago. He was 89 and he went peacefully, which is a mercy I'm grateful for. And the grief of losing him was real and enormous, but it was clean grief. I had shown up fully. For the years we had, I had been completely present, completely honest, completely myself. And that, I want to tell you, is the difference. That is the whole difference.